part of the problem. As I have mentioned in the past, one of the coolest things about my job is that I get to meet and talk to people who I really admire, who I've learned a lot from over the years. And this episode is about as good an example of that as we could get. We're joined once again by Colonel Douglas McGregor. How are you, sir? Thank you for taking the time and joining us.
I'm tempted to say I'm happy to be part of the problem, but it sounds bad.
Well, there you go. Well, you have, I mean, technically, I suppose you've had a long career. I'm sure you've been part of the problem and the solution at different points.
I don't know. We haven't found a solution yet. We've recommended many, but they don't seem to have adopted any.
Well, that is true. That is true. A good solution to an American war is something that has eluded us for, going on a century. But we'll get into a lot of that. And you have an event this weekend in Dallas, Texas, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I didn't realize we were competing with Dave Smith. That really upsets me. It's too bad. But I'm sure you'll have a lot of fun. I think ours will be fun, but it's going to be serious. We've sold out, which is nice. And it's a VIP reception and dinner. These are people that really wanted to talk with us. We have three of us there that are going to be talking to the people that are coming. It's called the National Conversation. And we basically got together. I had been, at the time I was still with the Our Country, Our Choice. And we decided we were frustrated because we just could not justify supporting Democrats or Republicans, because it struck us that, not to make it simplistic, but it struck us that, yeah, you go out, you vote, and inevitably you get John McCain. And the budget continues to explode and more money is spent and nothing is solved. So we said, look, why don't we found this thing called the National Conversation and start holding events all over the country, one every 90 days or so, and get a panel of people together each time. This time it's Natalie Brunell. I don't know if you know her. She's really known as the Bitcoin person, but she's much more than that. She's a very fine financial analyst. Judge Napolitano, we have to drag him in because we need somebody to tell us what the law says, because it's hard to tell what's real and isn't anymore. And of course, I'll be there. And we have a wonderful moderator. Her name is Dr. Olga Ravazzi, and she's taught at the university level. She's got command of a lot of information, particularly in international relations. Anyhow, we've invited all these people not to lecture them, but we'll answer questions as they're put to us by the moderator, and then the audience will have a chance to engage and tell us what they think. Because we want to get to the answer of, if we want to chart a third way in politics, something other than what we're hearing through the mainstream media, what are the core issues that we think we can unite around? And that's really what we want to find out, because we need desperately to unite around key things to hold the country together. Lenin used to say, every society is 3 meals away from a revolution.
Yeah.
He wasn't wrong. And we need to think about that.
No, that's absolutely right. And I do think, particularly in this moment right now, as somebody like I've been involved in the Libertarian Party before for years. I was in supporting the Republican Party when Ron Paul was running for president, but that was kind of not really supporting the Republican Party. That was kind of a third party candidate, running within one of the parties. And then, of course, in some ways, Donald Trump has kind of been a third party candidate running in the Republican Party in 2016, 20, and 24. And I did vote for Donald Trump and endorse him in this last election. And for many reasons, it seemed to me that Kamala Harris losing was like a must for our country. It also, forget even any policy, but just the pure humiliation of Kamala Harris being the commander in chief. It would have been, it gives one shivers in their soul.
Well, remember what we were talking about before we came on air. Lincoln said, ignorance is no bar to advancement in politics.
Man, did he get that one right?
That, yeah. But of course, then we're back to the John McCain problem, aren't we?
Yes, we sure are. But even maybe with as awful policies and even more ignorant than John McCain, if that's possible. But I do think that at least at this point now, and I really don't want to downplay, say, look, there has been tremendous success in terms of the border crisis compared to where we were a few years ago. And I think the Trump administration should get some credit for that. That is a big deal, and I'm not trying to downplay that. However, I do think almost now in the culmination of the Trump experiment, where Donald Trump did get 2 terms. I mean, he's in his second, but he did win 2 terms. And I think for a lot of us, people like myself, were kind of here before Trump and are coming back around to this now. We go on these very fundamental issues that are destroying the country, namely being forever wars, perpetual debt, and debasement of the currency. Both parties are in lockstep. And in some senses, Donald Trump might, when it comes to, say, unconditional support of Israel, might be actually a substantial click worse than the Democrats would be on that issue.
There's also another topic, though, that I think is very important to everybody, and people don't get this. This crosses all the racial lines. I don't care what anybody says. It's public safety.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And the Republicans might be a click better on that, but the problem is still not turned around. It's not nearly enough. And so in a sense, if you start to chart this thing out, like as if we're a car driving toward a cliff at 100 miles per hour, you're like, just voting in the Republicans is clearly empirically not enough to stop this car from heading toward this cliff. And in that case, I do think, as you're saying, we have to start exploring alternatives. Like, what is the I'm not asking for much. I'm just asking for a candidate who says, let's not get into stupid wars of choice and aggression, and let's be fiscally responsible. And yes, as you pointed out too, hey, maybe let's have some policies like you're not allowed to do heroin on the street. Like you have to go inside. Like I mean, I'm not a war on drugs guy at all. I'm just saying, like, we can't allow this crime to take over all of our big cities, and we have nobody in this country who is running a serious campaign on those issues.
No, it's and the idea that the solution is to attack other countries to solve the drug problem that exists inside your borders is a very dumb idea.
Yeah, that's right. I'm really glad you said that too, because, and maybe we could just do that topic first, but it's almost heartbreaking to me to see how many people who I think are good patriotic Americans who do, when Donald Trump or even other people who I like very much, like Vivek Ramaswamy and other people, talk about how we gotta drone bomb the drug cartels. And you sit there and you go, so are you telling me that you would like to combine the wonderful results of the policies of the war on terrorism with the war on drugs? You think that those two mixed together are going to end up being what? Like, this is going to be a good solution somehow? And then, of course, as you know, the onus seems to be, I mean, there seems to be no onus to even demonstrate, like, for example, with those boats off the coast of Venezuela, that they were drug dealers, or they had drugs, or they were on their way to us. Venezuela is not even one of the major contributors to our drug problem here. It's much more Colombia, Mexico, China. There's lots of other, it doesn't even make sense. And then, of course, as you know, led by the head of the State Department right now, Marco Rubio, there's been a major effort to flirt with a regime change in Venezuela that seems to be kicking up again.
Yeah, how many times do we have to play this film about regime change to discover that it's a dead end? It doesn't work. It leads you nowhere. This really goes back to the Bolsheviks. Once they took power in Moscow, they had this notion of perpetual revolution. They were going to march all the way across Europe and install new communist parties in power everywhere. Didn't work out. And it brought on the Second World War, frankly. I think we have to step back and ask ourselves, what are our real problems and what are the threats against us that we should be concerned about? I can't find existential threats beyond our borders. I'm sorry, I just don't see them. I see no evidence for mendacity and determination to attack and destroy us or Europe on the part of Moscow. Absolutely not. Yeah. Completely disinterested in that over there. The Chinese, how do you persuade people that Xi is not the evil Fu Manchu, that he actually wakes up every morning and hopes that he can hold 1.4 billion people together for another 24 hours? That's his top priority. And he spends most of his time fighting internal corruption, which is overwhelming. By the way, that's an ageless problem in China. When the Japanese invaded the place, they bought off half the Chinese and marched ashore. People don't realize that. All the bankers in Shanghai cut a deal with the Imperial Japanese Army. So the Imperial Japanese Army marched in, killed large numbers of Chinese, but they didn't touch the banks. We don't understand the reality. So I think we have to face the fact that most of the problems that we have are generated here at home by us. We create them. And the budget's a perfect example of it. We've reached a point where nobody on the Hill wants to cut a dime out of anything for fear they won't get reelected. That's not a good sign. It means that people pay attention to one thing and only one thing: the check in the mail, the freebie they get, the food stamp or something else. We've lost sight of everything else. And then you have the small group of people in Washington that enjoy these regime change wars. And effectively, the war with Iran is another regime change war waged by Israel and us. The possibility of war with Venezuela, which looks very, very real right now, unfortunately, is another regime change war. And if you go back and listen to Joe Biden and the people that surrounded him and the neocons that were advocates since, I would say easily since 2014, when we installed this puppet regime in Kiev to wage war on Russia, they've all been about regime change, at least on the surface. Obviously, they wanted to get into Russia, divide it up, strip it of its resources. The bankers were anxious to see that work so they could all get rich. We have a similar situation potentially in Venezuela. Venezuela has great oil and gas, emerald mines, gold mines. Gosh, of course, it's a big problem. You see, it's almost the size of Germany and France together. It has 1,700 miles of coastline. It has 1,380 miles of border with Colombia and roughly 1,380 miles of border with Brazil. Oh, that should be easy. Yeah, let's go change the regime. What are you going to do it with? 2,000 Marines? Some special ops? And of course, the old problem with all of these things, it's the problem in the Middle East, it's the problem with Russia. What do you do when it doesn't work? Well, historically, what have we done? Escalate until we can't, because the American people finally wake up and say that we've had enough. Get out. And that's what happened in Vietnam. Nobody talks about Vietnam anymore.
Yeah.
You don't talk about defeats, do you? Or do we talk much about Iraq? I don't think so. They threw us out in 2011. And the few that stayed on, they want to get rid of them. And I think most of us have pulled out as a result. Where's the big success story in Afghanistan? How many times do you have to have strategic failure before someone inside the United States notices? And that's the biggest problem, that the American people have been insulated from all these disasters. As long as, they can go out and get a case of beer, drive home, watch the game Monday night. Hey, it's not my problem. And we have no draft, so no one feels the pain except the less than 1% that are in the armed forces. And, they're expendable. What are we worried about them for? It's a pretty terrible situation. I don't think it can go on much longer. And, I think what may rescue us, this is a terrible thing to say, but it may be bankruptcy that rescues us from ourselves. But we have to admit to the blame, don't we? We're Americans. We voted for this stuff. We shut up. We said nothing. We said, fine, go ahead. And we're in a mess.
All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Kalshi. Kalshi is a prediction market where you can bet on just about anything, or you can go there and just see what people are betting on. Like, for example, there were bets raging about whether the government would or wouldn't shut down all last week. There's bets about whether Mamdani is going to win the mayoral race or not. He's the heavy favorite at this point. You could also bet on sports and all types of, basically anything you can think of. Check them out. Kalshi.com. Join the over 5 million users. You can trade on politics, culture, even the weather. That's Kalshi.com. All right, let's get back into the show. Yeah. No, there is something to that. We have to take some responsibility for it. And of course, this is what Ron Paul used to always say, is that this system is fundamentally unsustainable. And so it will not sustain itself. And that end is going to come one way or the other. And then I think the question is, what do we do with that? And what is the response to that? As you said, as you were talking about this, I'm thinking I had mentioned this on my last show, but so recently on Pierce Morgan, he had a panel where there was one of our mutual good friends, Scott Horton, was on, and your old colleague, General Wesley Clark, was on the show too. And there was one point where it was the end of the show. So like Wesley Clark made this point, and then Scott didn't get around to respond to it. But I found it like truly striking. At one point, Scott was he was condemning Donald Trump's support for Israel's destruction of Gaza. And then General Wesley Clark said once at the end, he said, yeah, but what's the alternative? What does Israel pull out now and let Hamas say that they won? And I was really taken back by that I went, so you, like, at this point, that Mr. former 4-star general, you still have not learned the lesson of, like, yes, that is, I mean, okay, technically that is true. And I guess that is one of the bad parts of fighting an occupation war where there's an insurgency and eventually you can't beat the insurgency. Yeah, all they have to do is not lose, and then they get to say that they won. But that applies to Afghanistan. That applied to Vietnam. That applies to, yes, if like, so, but essentially the thing that's so frustrating about it is that obviously, if you just think about this, what the situation, the corner that you're painting yourself into now is saying, what, you can't leave until what? There's not one young man with a rifle who wishes to avenge his cousin or father or son or like, until none of that. So until under current conditions, Gaza becomes Denmark, that's when this can end. Like, it's just, you've set an it's an obvious recipe for forever war. And it's shocking to me that somebody who, you know, like, look, I don't agree with Wesley Clark on a lot of things. He's a Democrat, and I don't agree with his politics. But you would think that here's a guy who was like the leader of the NATO forces, a 4-star general, a guy who's got to have, you know, like a head on his shoulders. And it was just stunning to me to hear that you're still working within this paradigm that means we bleed ourselves into bankruptcy and your boys get slaughtered, like the ones you're supposed to be responsible for. It's just, I guess the question is more like, how are more people in the military not able to see the things that you're able to see, I guess, is the question.
I think a lot of the trouble starts at West Point because you go to a mixer. In the old days, we were all male, and they would bus in these girls from all over the place. And somebody would walk in and say, well, you know, I'm not really very impressed and everything else. Somebody said, here's a beer, put your beer goggles on. And after enough beers, suddenly everything looks really good. I think Wes Clark, by the way, I know him and I like him personally very much. He's a very intelligent man. He and I always got along well, though we did not agree on a lot of things. But to his credit, he tolerated me when I disagreed with him. I think because he knew I would always be honest with him and I would be loyal to him, and I have been and I will be. But he was wounded, almost died in Vietnam. They had to fly him on an emergency basis all the way to Japan. And they thought they were going to lose him on the table. His wife flew into Japan, and it was almost nothing short of a miracle that he survived. And so you would think, in retrospect, as you reflect on that you would question exactly what you brought up. But it's deeply ingrained in him, this idea, well, you have to win. We haven't won anything for a very, very long time. And we forget how terrible the Second World War was. I listen to people like, well, we won the Second World War. Well, actually, 50 plus million people died in it. We happened to be on the winning side. But we were all really, really happy we came in late, and we were really, really happy when we only fought for about 3 years and it was over. And we don't want to go back there and experience it again. But that's not what you hear. I'm so glad the president was tough and told those Russians to get with the program. What? Have you lost your mind? This is a sovereign state. It has its own national security interests. They're legitimate security interests. What's wrong with treating them as legitimate security interests? They don't have any interest to compare to ours. Well, what are our interests in Ukraine? Explain this to me, please. I haven't figured it out. And oh, by the way, what driving strategic interest compels us to support the Israeli extermination of people in Gaza. I don't get it. Now, you may not like the people in Gaza. That's fine. And the Israelis, it's their country, obviously, if they want to do these things. But what are we doing supporting it? Is that consistent with our values? I hear all this crap all the time about, well, our values dictate that. Okay, what are those? Mass murder and expulsion? Where's that on the list? I don't see it. I wouldn't want to do that inside my own country. So, what are we doing it overseas for? It's all very, very odd stuff. And the biggest problem, though, I think it's not just the Americans who on any given day, Dave, you and I both know, the average American doesn't care what happens overseas. As long as he has a case of beer, he can watch the game, he's happy. As long as he has a car he can drive and can afford the gas, he's happy. As long as he has, wife and kids to play with, he's happy. I mean, this is kind of where we are. We're not an overly demanding people, and we are rather simplistic. We're not complex people in that sense. But the problem with this very inward focus is that we allow things to happen in our name beyond our borders that are catastrophic. Dave Petraeus, I talked to him back in 2005 when he was at Leavenworth. That's the last time he and I spoke. He was a couple of years ahead of me at the military academy, and I had come to the staff college to speak. And we talked. He talked about Iraq. What do you think, and everything else? And I said, well, these raids, checkpoints, and patrols. I said, this is just a steady grind. It's not going to take us anywhere. The British gave this up in Ulster. It didn't work. We don't want to do this. And he said, well, I agree with you, but we need to do these and these and these things. And finally, I said, well, why don't we just leave? And he said, we can't do that. Anbar province will become a platform for the projection of terrorism all over the world. I said, well, in Vietnam, we just left. We just pulled out. And it made no difference to us at all. But 58,000 men died. Another 100,000+ were wounded. And 2-3 million Vietnamese were butchered as a result. So this is insane. It's this mentality that, we can't do this. We have to have a surrender ceremony on the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay to end every conflict or we're unhappy. But that's not realistic, and that's not necessarily why you fight a war. You don't fight wars to exterminate people. I mean, maybe Stalin did and Hitler did, but we don't do that. So it's very frustrating, and I run into this all the time with many people that I served in the military with. And then you have the problem of people that were in Iraq or Afghanistan for long periods of time in the last 20, 30 years. And of course, they're not very fond of anybody they think is a Muslim. Okay, well, there was a time when we felt that way about anybody who came from Northeast Asia, especially after the Second World War with Japan. But you don't allow that kind of thing to shape your policy and your thinking. And I think politicians play to audiences too much.
Yeah, for sure.
What was it that H.L. Mencken said? If a politician found out he had cannibals in his district, he'd provide them with missionaries for dinner.
No, it's certainly not. And I think that there's, I guess, even for someone like me who I think a lot about these things and I enjoy reading, this is kind of my world. I have been really shocked by the recklessness and irresponsibility of the leadership within the military and the political class. Like even for a group of people, I understand there's going to be some corruption, there's going to be mistakes made and things like that. I mean, but look, even in the George W. Bush administration, John Mearsheimer covers this in his book. It's a very interesting little detail in American history. But immediately after 9/11, it was Colin Powell, probably the wisest member of the Bush administration, although he still fell in line and sold the war that he knew was based off lies. But that's between him and his maker at this point. But so Colin Powell went to George W. Bush and was like, you got to push for a two-state solution. I mean, that's the, if we got to go right to the core of this. This is why we deal with this terrorism problem. You got to, and then ultimately it was Tom DeLay and other forces who were like, oh no, you can't go against the lobby like that. You'll be a one-term president. And so he backed off of it. But just the point being that like there was an understanding by some wise people at the top of the military that like, look, this is why we deal with this terrorism problem. And there seems to be almost no thought of what, for even if you could remove any feeling of humanity for the poor Palestinians and what they are going through, the national security risk that this imposes on the American people to be, it's not as if like the world isn't so stupid to not know that this is America's genocide, not Israel's. Like, I mean, yes, it's Israel doing it, but they could never get away with this if it wasn't for the full support of the US government. Again, like Tucker Carlson, our friend last night, was breaking down Israel, like going back to basics here, Israel is a teeny little country in the Middle East. It's like they always like to say they're the size of New Jersey. They don't often mention they don't have the GDP of New Jersey. Okay, this is not, they are in no position to get away with any of what they're doing, including maintaining the occupation. They're in no position. Netanyahu goes around and talks a big game about what Israel can do. This is your baby brother talking about how he can win every bar fight, knowing that you're behind him, ready to crack skulls if anyone messes with him. Like, and so, but the fact that there seems to be either there's no feeling for this, or everybody is so controlled one way or another that they just can't act on it. But if just maintaining the occupation was this big security risk because it engendered all this hatred in the Muslim world against us, well, what is this? What have we seen over the last 2 years? And like the blowback doesn't always come within 18 months or something like that. Like we are opening ourselves up for a whole nother generation of young Muslim men to be radicalized toward hating us, even worse than we've already been dealing with. And there seems to be almost no thought of like, oh, that ought to be the concern of the American government, the national security of our country.
Well, unlike New Jersey, Israel also does not have any good pizza, movies. These guys having grown up in Philadelphia, I mean, that's very disappointing. Having been to Israel several times, that's something they lack. On the other hand, I think, we have to understand something. People like me, I grew up as a Quaker. My mother's family being in the country since 1681. In Philadelphia, I went to one of the oldest, well, I guess the oldest Quaker private school in the country. We were all male. Once again, this is before, mixed everything. And Israel was treated as this triumph of the Second World War, that in view of what had happened, and remember, the Jews collectively at one point or another have been thrown out of almost every country in Europe and the Middle East over 2,000 years. Now, we don't want to go down that road and ask that, why is that? But that was taught to us. We heard that, and they were murdered and butchered during the Second World War. We now have a state for them. So for most of us, everything began in 1947, 48, without any understanding of what had happened in the previous 80 to 100 years and how this sort of Israeli state crept into the mix thanks to the Rothschild banking cartel and people like Benjamin Disraeli, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, has always been one of my heroes. So we saw Israel as this very virtuous place that had lots of smart people that could do interesting things and were a blessing to humanity. And, I've been to Israel several times, and all of my dealings were always with the IDF, people who were either in the military or had been, and I liked them enormously, got along with them. There was always this undercurrent, especially in Gaza. I visited Gaza, the Israeli headquarters down there, in 2020 in February. And I saw everything that they did. And the Israelis had that place locked down so tight, you can't even begin to imagine. I mean, the quality of their intelligence that they did. I mean, if somebody on the other side shot at someone, an Israeli soldier in a tower or something on the outskirts of Gaza, they would know within, I would say, 90 seconds who it was. They had everybody's picture, everybody's cell phone number. They knew where everybody lived. They had all the tunnels mapped. I mean, this is a brilliant operation. And I remember asking a couple of officers that were there that were escorting me. I said, well, what are you going to do about this long term? I mean, there's nothing can be done with these people? I mean, surely they have this nice, as Trump said, nice property sits on the Mediterranean. Is there something? Oh, no, it's hopeless. Have you tried to? Oh, no, yeah, it's hopeless. Can't do anything. So I didn't say anything more. But when the attack happened on 7 October, one of the things I began thinking about immediately is, how did this happen? And within 2 weeks, it became pretty damn obvious to me that this was not an accident. This was deliberate. They let it happen. Now, when I say they, who are we talking about? We're talking about the leadership of the military, the state, the intelligence. And now we have women. The Israelis are very smart the way they employ their draftees. They take 6 or 7 very brilliant young women and say, your whole focus in life, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the next 2 years, whatever, is Gaza. And everything that happens there and all the intelligence, they monitor everything. They picked up that this was happening, and they've said so publicly, and they reported it. Then you have the deputy chief of staff of for intelligence in the Egyptian military, who gave a personal phone call to the head of intelligence, I guess it was Shin Bet, or it could have been Mossad, I don't know which, and said, look, you got an attack coming, this thing. And of course, by that time, a lot of people knew. They'd watched them, practice. Then this horrible attack happens, but the attack was horrible enough. But then, as Max Blumenthal points out, they had to lie about all of it and make it seem much worse than it was. Not that it wasn't bad. Of course it was bad. And, this was very tough for me to deal with because I had this very positive picture. And then it became very obvious. This is a trigger to unleash this massive murder and expulsion campaign. And that's what it's been. Now we know there are over 600,000 people have died. An estimated 70% of them are children. I don't know what the ages they're giving. It's unbelievable. It is something that I could never conceive of in the modern world, particularly involving Israel, because I saw this state in a very different light from the way I see it today. And I think this is hard. It's hard. I'm a boomer, right? So all the boomers, they immediately say, well, the hell with these people in Gaza. But people are people. I don't care what they look like or whether you like them or not, or what their religion is. I don't see that the average human being on the planet deserves to be exterminated because another person somewhere else says so. This is very tough. This is very hard. And I don't know that there is any solution that we could embrace other than to cut off the aid and stop it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think it's the obvious, it's one of the kind of parallels in a way between Israel and Ukraine is that you see that, and this is, I guess, goes kind of to the heart of why the founders of this country never wanted us to be an empire. Because even when you get in these entangling alliances and you realize that even if well-intentioned, and I certainly am not claiming that I think any of this stuff is well-intentioned, but even if well-intentioned, there's just a tremendous moral hazard that comes along with these security guarantees and blank checks where you give, you put people in a position. Again, it's like saying to your little brother, like you're going out to the bar and you go, you get in a fight with anyone, I got your back. Well, the problem with that now is that you're encouraging him to maybe get in some fights that he otherwise would have talked out and not came to fisticuffs. And obviously in Ukraine, that's just clearly true, that there would have been a negotiated peace at the very beginning of this, which almost undoubtedly would have been more in the Ukrainian favor than what the final agreement, whenever this thing ends, will be.
Well, there's an expression, if I could say something real quick. If there is no accountability, there is no performance. And we really haven't held people accountable, military or political, for a very long time for doing anything. And as a result, they think they can do anything. In other words, there are no constraints. And that's really what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
And my maternal grandfather was in the First World War. He came back on active duty in the Second, but in the First World War, he was in the Army. He was a private. He enlisted after he graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. So did most of his classmates. You won't see that happen anymore. And in fact, he used to say to me, he always wanted me to go to Annapolis, which I absolutely did not want to go to because I don't like going to sea. It really bothers me. I don't like to be out of sight of land. I'm happy flying. And I figure if it fails, well, it'll be quick and done with it. I don't want to feed the sharks or something else, from a ship. So I didn't ever want to do that. So he would say to me, though, he said, Doug, I was in the Army, and in the Second World War, I was in the Navy. And I was a private, and then I was a master sergeant in just a few months, and then I became an officer. And he said, but in the Army, in a war, you don't get much to eat. Whatever you get to eat is cold. You freeze. You live in the mud. It's nasty, and people shoot at you all the time. He said, so if you're in the Navy, you're aboard ship, and most of the time you have nice, clean, dry clothes, and everything's warm, and the food's excellent, and you always have coffee, and you're not really under fire very much. So I really think you should go to Annapolis. And I said, no, I went into the Army. He wasn't entirely wrong. I found that out the hard way. But having said all of that, my family on both sides, everybody was violently opposed. I mean, almost to the point of violence against war in 1917. And, the first point was, what has Germany or Austria-Hungary done to us? Nothing. What's the basis for this? Who made them the enemy? Why are we committing the national treasury and 2 or 3 million soldiers to this war? And of course, the casualties we took were terrible. People don't realize that. In 110 days of fighting, we had 318,000 casualties. People don't realize that. That's far more intense than, frankly, most of what happened in the Second War. Okay. Second War was episodic. And we had 110,000 killed. And if you do the math, that comes down to about 1,000 dead for every day of fighting. Now, I don't think most people in this country would tolerate that sort of thing. But yet we have a lot of people right now talking about war potentially with the Russians, war potentially with Iran, which could inevitably, or I would argue will inevitably bring in Russia, China, and other states in the Middle East now. And on top of this, we're talking about Venezuela, a place about which most of us know absolutely nothing. And I don't see any serious existential military threat emanating from Venezuela. We are out of touch with reality. We don't know what this word war means anymore. And that's the greatest danger because, in Europe in 1914, that was the problem. In Germany, France, Britain, Russia, everywhere. They hadn't had a major war for 50 years or almost 50. And people thought, oh, this will just be, few months, it'll be over and, we'll trade some territory and we'll be back to normal. Well, that's not what happened. And if we get involved in this war as we are now in the Middle East and potentially in Europe, because even though President Trump has said, I really don't want to do this anymore, so I'm just going to give you weapons and you can pay us for them and then you go do whatever you want, we're still there. We still have 100,000 men along the border. If this thing is pressed by the Europeans, you're going to see widespread destruction in Germany, Poland, Great Britain, any number of places. We're not going to be able to stay out of that. So we've lost the sense that our number one priority in foreign and defense policy should be avoid war. Instead, we seem to be in the hunt for it. As you and I were talking before this began, 2 wars aren't enough. Don't worry, we got a third one over here. This is nuts. Yeah. It's crazy, and none of it is affordable. And we're on very fragile financial grounds right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then I will say, of course, particularly with the situation with Israel, it's also now creating enormous turmoil within our own country. And that people, we saw mass protests through 2023 and 2024 about the destruction of Gaza. I'm not sure, as school season is just starting up here again now, we might be in for more of those. Of course, you also see, it's one of the things that's interesting, and I'm curious to kind of get your take on this, because this is what a lot of people speculate about. But one of the things that seems to be interesting and somewhat different about the relationship with Israel than any of these other conflicts is that you have these situations like, say, okay, Joe Biden's running a presidential campaign, and then, of course, as we know, then he dropped out and Kamala Harris came in, or he dropped out and then Kamala Harris came in. He was escorted out, and then Kamala Harris came in. It was clearly, just politically speaking here, right, which is something that politicians care about, it was an enormous political albatross around Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's neck that they were on the hook for supporting this policy in Gaza. A huge portion of the Democratic base was just appalled by it. I remember seeing polls where it was like 70% of Democrats considered it a genocide. So you got 70% of your base thinks you're funding a genocide, and it really hurt them enormously also in the sense that there was no protesting against Donald Trump's campaign from the left because the left was all too busy protesting the genocide in Gaza. And so it really was a political problem for them this year. Obviously, in Donald Trump's administration, we've seen time and time again where it's a real political problem for him. Not just that his base is divided on this. He's losing, he's got guys like Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly and Candace Owens and even Charlie Kirk to some degree before he died, who were really divided. Like the most influential people are divided over, we don't really want to get in this war with Iran. Then when he tries to take the Iranian off-ramp that they give him and pushes for a ceasefire, Israel goes and bombs him again, and he's furious about this. You can just tell. And obviously, it's in Donald Trump's interest for this thing to be wrapped up. And yet, so with both major political parties, even though this thing is in their interest to get rid of, their very immediate political interest, they still are giving unconditional support to Israel, and they still will just kind of, it feels like at least, we'll never see a moment with Trump that was like the moment he had with Zelensky, as much as that didn't work out, and now he's back to not as good a place. But it just seems like this, I think, mixed with the fact that our government and our media class has lied to the American people about every major crisis for the last 30 years, and they've all been exposed. The mix of those two things leads people to jump to conspiratorial conclusions. Like, why is it that this tiny little country halfway around the world, who we do not rely on for anything at all, why is it that both major political parties seem to be completely controlled by this country?
Well, it's a measure of what you're discussing, that most people polled today are convinced that the Israelis had a hand in killing Charlie Kirk. Now, I have not, I know who Charlie Kirk was. I think we spoke 3 or 4 times in short interviews. He asked me to come on, and I did. But also when it became clear that I was an opponent of this policy in Gaza, that was it. I was out. I don't know if you go back and look at one of his Turning Point USA events, and I think this was, oh gosh, maybe a couple of years ago. Michelle Bachmann was there as a representative of the MAGA right or something, and she stood there and said, yes, the Israelis should kill all of them. I'm 100% for this. They should all be killed. I almost fell out of my chair. Who the hell is this woman? Does she know what she's saying? Does she have any idea what she's saying? This is a terrible thing. And I know, having worked with President Trump briefly face to face, and I liked him, I gave him enormous credit in 2019 for resisting the pressure to go to war with Iran when we had this global hawk shot down on the air defense identification zone's periphery. And if you know international law, any military aircraft that flies along that ADIZ, air defense identification zone, and in the case of Iran, that runs right down the middle of the Persian Gulf. And General McKenzie, who was the CENTCOM commander, had specifically asked for that Global Hawk. Then he plotted the route for the Global Hawk right down the middle, right along that air defense identification zone. And the Iranians looked, and they went back and forth and asked, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Finally said, shoot it down. Well, under international law, they had the right to do that. That was legitimate. It was unmanned. It was not manned. And so President Trump's question at the time was it manned? No, it was unmanned. He said, so no one was killed? No. And he said, well, then I'm not prepared to launch a war. And they had this thing ready to go. This strike package was there because you had Bolton in the White House. Yeah. You had Pompeo over at State. The neocons were there with, I'm sure, McCain and Cotton and everybody else on the phone. Go, go, go. Let's go. Get him now. And he wouldn't do it. And he actually asked the question, well, if we do this strike, how many people are we going to kill? And everybody sat there and, Well, 700, something like that. And he said for an unmanned aircraft. So I'm not going to do it. The other question that came up later, but it was in the undergrowth, I would say, of the discussion. What do we do after we strike Iran? All right, you kill 600 or 700 people, you destroy batteries of missiles or radars or something. Then what? And this is the biggest problem right now. Whatever you want to do with Russia, whatever you want to do with Iran, whatever you want to do with Venezuela, after you do it, the question should be, now what? And that's never asked. Well, we got to go to Vietnam and fight communism. Okay, we go over there and we fight. It doesn't work. Then what? This is the problem. There's no second question. There's no serious debate. What are the implications? And nobody stands up and says, well, it's really not in the interest of the American people and the United States government to be drawn into a war. Just as it wasn't in our interest to go into World War I.
Yeah. Well, it seems to the extent that the question, then what, even gets mentioned, it almost seems like they just like they just write a fairy tale, and that, you know, it's the we'll be greeted as liberators and it'll be a cakewalk, you know. So they just assert that everything will be sunshine and rainbows. And in fact, there were around the 12-day war, which we'll see if it's referred to that in history or not. But around this recent war with Iran, there were Israeli officials who were posting pictures with the son of the Shah, kind of implying that, like, that's the then what, that we'll just waltz in with the, because everybody will embrace hereditary monarchy that was imposed by the West to begin with. And I remember just being blown away by how far-fetched the idea that the son of the Shah would come into power and that would calm everything down, and then Iran would turn into a liberal democracy or something. And you just sit there like, after the last 20 years of results, that any adult wouldn't look at that and go, okay, but you know, what if maybe that doesn't work out quite like that? And what if actually there are several different factions who would like to seize power? And what if many of those factions are more radical than the current people in power? And what if it takes a full military occupation to actually ensure that the people you'd like to see in power get in power? Because that seems to be what it always takes. Like, if you could do a regime change like you did in Libya, where you do a drive-by regime change and the country becomes a failed state and is an absolute disaster. But if you actually want to have a say over who you're putting into power next, you're going to have to be occupying that country. And of course, as you know better than most, that often is only maintained for the extent that the occupation is maintained, as in Afghanistan, where it's literally was a matter of days.
Well, stick your hand in a bucket of water, you displace the water. As soon as you remove your hand, the water returns.
Right.
There are cultural means all over the world in regions. If you want to know what Iraq is going to look like in 20 years, don't look at the United States. Don't look at Great Britain. Don't look at Sweden. Don't look at Japan. Look at the other states that border Iraq. Right. They're going to be a little bit of Iran. They're going to be a little bit of Syria. They may be a little bit of Turkey. In other words, this is reality, and these things are not easily changed. Genghis Khan used to say, occupations turn soldiers into jailers. The Mongols didn't occupy anything. After they took over, they stuck a new bunch in there and said, all right, this is the deal. You can rule. I'm leaving a small contingent of Mongols here to make sure that you don't get out of line, like 400 or 500 people. But you got to pay this tribute to us on a routine basis. Otherwise, you're free to do pretty much what you want. Well, that actually worked. And of course, all you had to do was slaughter a few 100,000 people. Everybody got the idea, clearly. But my point is that he was smart enough not to occupy.
Right.
Occupations are bad news. And we have this terrible problem with wishful thinking. If China becomes prosperous and successful, has a wonderful economy, they'll all become liberal Democrats. No, they're Chinese.
Right.
They have a culture and a civilization that's 5,000 years old. What do you expect them to do? They're going to be Chinese, and Chinese are not like us. Sorry. It's not the same group of people, not the same set of values. And by the way, their values are not necessarily wrong. Neither is their civilization or their way of life. We got to get out of this business of sort of declaring ourselves the model for everybody else. We're not. And we really, really need to focus here at home. You know, we have this thing we talk about on the Chinese side, the one belt, one road. And if you go to the Department of Defense, oh, that's a danger. Really? Oh, yes, they're building all this infrastructure across Central Asia and down into the Middle East, and they're linking everybody by roads and rail. And this is a danger. I said, well, why? Everybody's going to trade, and this is going to be successful, they hope. Maybe we ought to plug into it. What do you mean by that? Well, you know, we're a maritime and aerospace power. We're only a land power in the Western Hemisphere. In other words, we don't own anything in the Eastern Hemisphere. I'm sorry. That's a big wake-up call. We don't own a damn thing over there. So we could plug in. We have not looked at the things that we can do. You know, we can cross the ocean from Rochefort in France to the east coast of the United States with fast sea lift. I mean, brand new ships that are faster than anything anybody's seen. We can get everything that comes into Rochefort on rail. We can put it right on a ship. We can rush it across to Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Charleston, Corpus Christi, wherever you want to go, offload it onto super fast rail and ship it lightning speed across the United States to Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, Puget Sound, and then send it from there to Japan or China or Indonesia or Southeast Asia. We can actually do it faster and better than the Chinese can across Central Asia, because they've got to go through multiple countries. And every country you go through, what happens? Hey, pay me. Now you have to secure it. But we speak one language from the Atlantic to the Pacific, at least in theory. And we have one set of laws, one country. There are no extra payments. So we could do a land office business if we saw ourselves that way. But is anybody talking about it? No. We want to invade Venezuela. Doesn't make any sense. And what happens to the heartland? All the people that bought into the MAGA story and voted for Donald Trump. If we built what I just described, the people in the heartland who've been abandoned, who've been deindustrialized, they would profit. It would spur growth there. But we need to invade Venezuela.
It's just, you know, it's like, as I'm listening to you say this, I can't help but think that all of it seems so communistic in theory. Like just and I mean just like look, like the neoconservatives themselves, the original real neoconservatives were ex-communists. They were Trotskyites who came over. That's why they were neoconservatives. And if you really look at it objectively, they weren't very conservative about anything at all. And of course, as you were talking about, like, you know, the occupation going from, you know, fighters to jailers. They also essentially, the ask of them is to become a communist government. They have to go in there and basically become the state that's going to dictate everything for these people. And you're asking your military to do something that isn't possible to do, which is to be a true socialist government that's deciding what resources go everywhere. And just the basic idea that we, like, even if you were going to say that, hey, I reject cultural relativism, and I think that American culture is superior to Chinese culture or something like that. It's like, okay, but then the question really becomes, what are you going to do? Enforce that at a barrel of a gun? I mean, if you believe that, you could set an example and you could say to the rest of the world, like, hey, I think you guys would be better off having a Bill of Rights and doing liberty the way America does liberty. But the idea that we are going to go around the world and stamp out every other way of life and impose ours is, frankly, if nothing else, utopian. It's just not of this world. You know, I remember there was one point shortly after October 7th, and Israel began to launch its offensive in Gaza. And Joe Biden, president at the time, kind of debatably, in name, was the president at the time. Mm-hmm. He was asked, he goes, you know, you already have this conflict in Ukraine. Can America afford to be backing another war now in Gaza? And Joe Biden went, of course. This is the United States of America. We can do it all. And I do think it's like, wow, you really talk about being born on third base and thinking you hit a triple. You were this corrupt Delaware senator who happened to be lucky enough to be in the unipolar moment, and you just still are living, because you don't even know what year it is. You're still living in this idea that like America can do whatever it wants to. And like, do you not just look at the 37 trillion in debt and the massive crisis that we had at the time at the southern border, and the massive crisis of homelessness, and that we have the worst racial and political and tribal divides of my lifetime, and you still have the attitude that we can remake the entire world, even staring in the face of all the failures that you've supported over your career? It's hard. It's just hard to imagine that these people haven't snapped out of this.
Yeah, well, good luck with snapping them out.
Yeah.
Washington said when he left office, give us 20 years of peace and we will become so prosperous and economically strong that no one in the world will challenge us. That was his answer to the military question. And then he also argued, along with Alexander Hamilton, that we can be the engine of prosperity, not just for ourselves, but for others. And if we're successful, others in the world will want to imitate us and emulate us. That was the answer to Thomas Jefferson, who wanted us to join the French Revolution. Think about that. Jefferson believed that, we were the model. And that would have been wonderful. As Alexander Hamilton and Washington said, we like Thomas Jefferson, but he doesn't understand the Austrians, the Russians, the Prussians, the British, everybody will land on the North American continent to crush us. We don't want anything to do with that. They were right then. They're still right now. We can turn this thing around, but we're not going to get there where we're headed. That's for damn sure. And It doesn't matter at this point, I think, who's in power. It's not going to work.
Yeah, well, that's why I think it's so important that you continue your efforts and explaining this stuff to people, because it really is. No, you really do have such an important knowledge base, and kind of you really are somebody who has the knowledge and the wisdom to explain this to people. And I'm super, super grateful that you took the time to spend with us. I'd love to do this again real soon. Please, before we get out of here, let my listeners know where they can go to find you and follow you and anything else that you got going on.
First of all, on 4 October, when we had this VIP dinner in the evening, your friend and my friend Scott Horton is going to be there. So if you can break away and stick your head through the door, we'll tell you where it's going to be, and we'd love to see you. You could at least show up and have a free drink, whatever.
Okay, absolutely.
Now, beyond that, you can plug my name into anything, and generally you'll find it on YouTube, or you'll see something on the net. And I've written a lot of things. I've got a paper right now that I wrote for RFK Jr. at his request back in the fall of 2024. Actually, it started earlier than that, because I was supporting RFK Jr. Then he went to the Trump team and so forth. And, look, that paper is worth looking. I think I sent it to your producer. It's called Taming the Warfare State. A lot of the things that the Secretary of War mentioned, those are all addressed in some detail. And so anyway, bottom line is just Colonel Doug McGregor. You'll see anything you want, but I do have a website. It'll take you there if you just plug in my name. But the bottom line is the national conversation is our attempt to begin a movement in a fundamentally new direction. And we hope it will be successful, but it's just the beginning.
Yeah. Well, it's something the country desperately needs, so I am rooting for it. Thank you again, sir, and thank you to everybody for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you, Dave.
Sorry, Rob. It was my fault. I asked you the question. What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. I'm Dave Smith. He is Robbie the Fire Bernstein. We were just talking nicotine pouches a little bit as you guys came in there. I'm sorry for that. That's how it happens sometimes. I'm a big Alp man. That's my thing. I like these Alps. I'm getting no money off of that. I'm just sucking up to Tucker Carlson. That's all I'm doing. But no, I really do like them. They got me off the vape, so that's good. And Rob, they got you onto nicotine. So yeah, it's all, one up, one down.
I was drinking pretty heavily the other night. Someone gave me a 9 milligram Alp. I was like, I'll try that. I put it in my mouth and realized I already had 2 Zins in.
That is,
Yeah,
there's no need for any of that.
No, that'll even you out real quick. I had a great weekend out in California with Brian McWilliams. We filmed a whole bunch of stuff. Going to be putting out a porch tour mockumentary in December, and coming to the end of the run here, everybody. So come on out. I got New York City this week at a cool spot. I've got Bridgeport on Wednesday, Walpole, Massachusetts, somewhere in New Hampshire, and then Providence, Rhode Island, and then gigs next week, and that's about it for the year.
Yeah, man. I got the festival, of course, and then we have one night, which we always do every November. I don't know why this has become a yearly tradition, but we always do one night in Poughkeepsie in November, and then I always take December off because it's holidays and I've got a bunch of family birthdays and stuff like that, and I like to have 1 month out of the year where I don't travel for work, so that's always December. But the Poughkeepsie shows there are tickets available as of right now. Both these shows are going to sell out. So if you want to come see me and Rob, also buddy Chris Vega will be there as well. If you want to come see us, that's your last chance to see all of us together for the rest of the year is in Poughkeepsie, New York. ComicDaveSmith.com. Ticket links are up there. All right. So for today's episode, the commies are pissing me off. And so I just think we got to do an episode about how retarded they are, because communism is retarded. And, there's been a couple things that have been on my mind that made me decide this, because I was thinking about a completely different topic for today's show, and then I kind of changed my mind. If you had asked me yesterday what the show was going to be like today, it would have been a completely different thing. But I just felt like what I was going to do, I'm probably going to handle in the next couple weeks. I got a couple big shows coming up soon that I think will be fun. I'm going on Louder with Crowder with Steven Crowder tomorrow.
Oh, that's happening.
Yeah, that is finally happening tomorrow. And then I believe it's happening right before our show tomorrow, so we could discuss that, I guess, maybe a little bit tomorrow. And then also I believe I'll be going on, well, you know what, let me not announce that because they haven't announced it yet, but another big show that I think will be fun that people will like in the next couple weeks coming up. So got some more big things going that I'm excited for, and then there's one more that hasn't been confirmed yet, but I think will also happen. But I wanted to talk about this for a couple reasons. Number one, it kind of just, I was thinking about this a lot last week, and then sometimes you kind of have you think about something and then you're like, maybe that's right. And then the more you think about it, you're like, oh, this is 100% right. And the thought was simply this, that the favorite to be the Democratic nominee right now in 2028 is clearly AOC. And it's almost like once I realized that, I couldn't unsee it. And I was like, oh yeah, this is, it sounds crazy that AOC could be the Democratic nominee until you think about everyone else. And then it's just, and part of this was that I've been seeing the reaction that AOC has been getting. And then I saw another clip of Gavin Newsom, which maybe we'll play at some point in this. And I was just like, oh yeah, this guy's not a contender. He's not going to win this. It's going to be her. And she is actually the one who is like, has a little bit of street cred with the progressives and the socialists, but also is kind of an establishment Democrat at heart. And that's just the right balance that you could, have the establishment allow you in and actually be able to rally people into it. And of course, this is all in the background of Mamdani, who is like about to become the mayor of the biggest city in the United States of America and the financial capital of the world. Kind of a big deal. And I've, throughout this whole thing, because Mamdani, first of all, because Andrew Cuomo ran against him or is running against him, who is the lockdown governor, the face of the COVID, government totalitarian response, and also happens to be Benjamin Netanyahu's lawyer and has made Israel a major issue in this race. It was just very easy for a while to focus on how awful all those people are. And Mamdani is being smeared in every ridiculous way. That they're claiming that he's a jihadist. They're claiming that he whatever, like all these dumb things. He hates Jews. He wants to globalize the Intifada. He wants to whatever. He's pro 9/11 or something like that. Whereas so he's being attacked on every ground that's ridiculous, and then nobody seems to be really focusing on what he's actually saying which does deserve to be criticized. And so I thought maybe that's just what some of our focus should be going forward. Any thoughts on any of that, Rob?
Off the bat, I think AOC beating Newsom after debates is a spicy take. Now I don't like Newsom, and there was a bunch of clips making the rounds about him being a total goofball as he tries to represent himself and can't really forge a cohesive image. And it's lunacy, but I don't see AOC clearing the debates. I think in a post-Kamala Harris world, you're going to have a hard time selling people on the idea that this also is not a stupid person. I do hope that AOC runs because maybe she can break Kamala Harris's record for most money spent on a campaign that goes nowhere. Now, she's not quite as stupid as Kamala Harris, and she does not have Kamala Harris's unlikability, but she's pretty dumb.
Okay, look, I can't technically argue with that statement, but I would just say that perhaps my only gripe with it would be that I think you might be downplaying the gap there. Like she's a dummy. She does not have a sound understanding of policy or something like that, or anything for that matter. But she is so much better at this than Kamala Harris was. And I do think that's important to, Kamala Harris was good at playing the power game, that she was good at, like, I don't know, sleeping with the right guys or whatever she was doing to move up the rank to become the attorney general of California. Like, she was good, or one of the leading prosecutors, I forget her exact title, but she was very good at that. But in terms of like appealing to people, the Kamala Harris never had what AOC does have, which is a somewhat authentic grassroots level of support. And so, yes, like I get your point. Like, she's also another dumb chick, but not like Kamala Harris. And she, even though we really disagree with it, she does at least have something to say. Kamala Harris did not have anything to say.
She has a charisma to her. She actually has a grassroots fan base. She is not as much of a train wreck that you can't put her on any interviews, but through a whole campaign season, I think people are going to feel uncomfortable with and also, I'll just say it, she's getting fatter and her tits aren't getting perkier, and I don't think that's going to help her either.
Well, look, I mean, if we want to get serious about this, we do know what moves the needle here. Okay, so I'm not going to argue with that. Yeah, some people might have to be hired. But look, I'll just say that I'm saying, again, this is all grading on a curve. I'm saying I'm comparing all the candidates right now, and I'm just going by process of elimination. And you know what? Bernie Sanders is too old, and Jon Stewart is too short and too Jewish, and Gavin Newsom is too goddamn phony and transparently just full of shit. And what are we left with here now, Rob? Like, Kamala Harris going to try to run again? Okay, that's not a serious candidate. You think Shapiro or Gretchen Whitmore, these governors who the CNN tries to convince you have some shot to run? I just don't see it. And who is left standing here to me is this AOC lady. Now, look.
JD Vance versus AOC is the cringiest presidential race of all time.
Oh, it's going to get rough. But it is... But again, I'm saying, making these predictions, we're not even in 2026 yet. I'm talking about 2028. So obviously I could be way wrong and there could be people we're not thinking about. But I'm kind of saying, as of right now, this seems to be, to me, like what the most likely outcome is. Now getting into some of this stuff here, because I do think there is, there's this tragedy that is just being a libertarian. That's just part of what we sign up for, that it's just, you're always kind of, it's a constant,
like being a Mets fan.
Yes. Well, it's a constant pattern of, but worse than a Mets fan, because you're not actually right to be a Mets fan. Like we're in this position where we go, look, okay, you shouldn't go down this economic path. And then everyone goes, no, we're going to go down this economic path. And then they go down that path, and it's the disaster that we told them it was going to be. And then they go, this is why we got to keep going down this path. And we're just like, wait, but the whole point was it's funny because there's been the two, probably the two biggest crises that have hit the United States of America in my life. I mean, obviously there's been a lot of different things, but probably the two biggest ones that hit America while I was alive, like actually this country, not crises in other countries that we caused or exacerbated. But the ones that hit America were probably Well, I mean, I guess 9/11 is up there, but I was thinking the financial crash in '08 and COVID, which, you know, as bad as 9/11 was, it wasn't quite on the scale of those other two. And both times, and I guess you could say this even for 9/11 too, but all of those times, it was like the takeaway was that's why libertarianism is wrong. You know, that's why, you know, in there were major articles written in the New York Times and things like that after the '08 crash. It was, and everybody blamed liberty. It was all free market economics. That's what caused this. It was capitalism, you know. And then when COVID came, it was the New York Times major. There's no libertarians during a pandemic, you know, and that everybody knows we need lockdowns now because look at this virus. And in both cases, we were totally vindicated, totally proven right. It was actually the best argument for being a libertarian. You know, they bailed. They had this huge government action after the financial crash, bailed out all the bankers, and then let them keep their bonuses and still let Americans get their houses foreclosed on. Nobody defends this in hindsight. Almost nobody defends it in hindsight. And same with the COVID stuff. It's just complete. We would have been so much better just being libertarians the whole time, you know, as a society. But every time there's a major crisis, we have to pretend, like in 2008, we have to pretend that, hey, look, at the culmination of 8 years of Ron Paul being president and Judge Napolitano taking over the Supreme Court and, you know, whatever, Robert Murphy being the Fed secretary. Now, all of a sudden, we have this problem because of all you libertarians. But in fact, none of that happened. And it was George W. Bush who was president, and we spent like trillions of dollars on stupid wars. And then he had a huge expansion of Medicare and the Department of Education and just all types of big government programs. And then when it's a disaster at the end of that, they go, the problem here was libertarians. The problem here was capitalism, free markets. And so now it does seem that in this latest crisis of whatever it is that we're facing right now, it seems again that socialism is what's being embraced and capitalism is what's being blamed. And I don't know if you've looked at this, Rob, but I've seen some like opinion polls on this amongst young people, which really is scary. And just when you feel like you're making some strides, and it's like, oh, the young people are turning against the warfare state and turning against the Zionists, and they're turning against the legacy media and all this, but they're turning towards socialism. Just these and even amongst the Trump supporters, like Gen Z MAGA, like even they are like very likely to say things like, you know, profit is theft or whatever, and kind of embrace this idea that the government should be taking a.
Can blame Trump, who's indoctrinated his base for central planning, for U.S. manufacturing jobs and high tariff policies. So it's very much a part of Donald Trump's agenda, and the Republicans at large have absolutely just folded on defending free markets against socialism when you have people like Josh Hawley talking about why you need more Medicaid, and you've got other characters talking about why you can't end Obamacare. So the Republicans have no one but themselves to blame for basically embracing socialism to try and appeal to the masses.
Oh, 100%, man. It's a failure. Look, I mean, the truth is, if in 2025 you have young people embracing socialism, even communism, then yeah, obviously, Rob, right? Like by definition, the Republicans have fucking failed. And you know what? That I'll take a piece of that failure for all of us. All of us have failed. Like the Republicans have failed. The Cato Institute has failed. The Mises Institute has failed. Reason Magazine has failed. Our podcast has failed. Like if you're telling me that the most disastrous economic policy of the 20th century, that is wherever it is still alive in the 21st century, still results in nothing but misery and starvation and tyranny, like the biggest disaster of any ideology that's ever existed is communism. It's like responsible for like 100 million deaths in the 20th century alone. If people still are asking for that, then yeah, we've all failed. But obviously, Rob, to your point, no one owns that failure more than the freaking Republican Party, because there's supposed to be an entire political party, one of the major two political parties that's devoted to what? Republicanism. Right? Like keeping a limited constitutional Republican style of government, which means to some degree laissez-faire capitalism. And Yeah, they've completely failed to fight against this whole thing. And a huge part of that, of course, is because we live in this insanely corrupted big government country, and everybody's been convinced that that's what capitalism is. And if that's what if this most crony and corrupt and blood-soaked version of capitalism is capitalism, well, then of course the young people want whatever the opposite of that is. You know, and you watch this all the time, man. Like, it's one of the weaknesses that libertarians, or just people like us, it's one of the weaknesses we have, is that we live in this world of like arguments and evidence and policy views, and that's not how most people decide what team they're on politically. Most people that, you know, you some guy in a suit who's 28, who's going, you know, to work, and he's trying to move up the corporate ladder, and he's trying to make money and hustle. And then he sees like some hippie smoking weed who's like, hey man, like money is theft or something like that. And he goes, dude, I'm going to be a hardcore right winger, because I'm just going to be the opposite of whatever that is. You know, like that's how most people decide what their politics are. It's like who they don't like, they make an emotional decision, then they rationalize from there. And you see this all the time, dude. You see how many people that were left wingers just became right wingers during COVID, because they're like, I don't know, I'm against this thing, so I want to be the opposite of whatever the people who are for this thing is. And that's how it happens. And so the same way they look at this system and go, well, this is capitalism, call me a communist, you know? And that's what seems to be happening here. But so let's like actually try to, because the thing is that the argument for it is just so weak. It's so, I've always found this to be the case, that like it is, and you know, there's people who I like who are on the left, and weirdly, you know, through the last couple years, there's been a lot of kind of allies or coalition building with people who are just against supporting Israel in this war. And a lot of those people are left wingers who are supporting Mamdani and are pretty damn socialist. And now I don't think any of them, to be completely fair here, would call themselves communist. But so much of the thinking does come from that. And straight up communism does at least seem to me to be almost the implied, obvious, correct answer. Like, if what you're saying is true, then why wouldn't we just do this? Which seems to be the logical conclusion of all of it. And, but yet, you know, it's like, as I've said, like, I've read a lot of socialists over the years, and read communists over the years, and it's just garbage. Like, the whole thing is just such bad theory. It's like, if you read Karl Marx, the theory is awful. It's just, it makes no sense at all. Like all the stuff about like the whole labor theory of value thing is all completely flawed. This has been debunked. It's not even like anyone can, there's no economists who are defending the labor of theory value. And if they are just out to lunch. His whole idea of like, being, you know, like you should be able to be a fisherman one day and then a poet the next day and a factory worker the next day, is like, this makes no sense at all. It's just removed from reality. People get good at the thing they do. It's so much more efficient for us to have people that do something that they have a knack for and get better at. And his entire prediction of the future, everything was wrong. And he said the workers of the world were going to unite to bring global communism. And then he wrote this in what, 1848? And then in the next 100 years, the workers of the world all united underneath their national flags to go fucking kill each other in 2 world wars. Like, just not, his predictions were terrible. The theory was terrible. And everywhere it's been put into practice, it's been a complete disaster. And then you read like Mises and Rothbard, and you're like, oh, see, this is good theory. So anyway, let's get into it. Let's play this clip from Mamdani. His freeze the rent clip here. These are the campaign speeches he's given. Let's take on some of these ideas.
Here is what we stand for, my friends. We are going to freeze the rent for more than 2 million rent-stabilized tenants and use every resource at our disposal to build housing for everyone who needs it. We are going to eliminate the fare on every single bus line. what are currently the slowest buses in the nation move around this city with ease. And we are going to create universal child care at no cost to parents. So New Yorkers can raise their family in the city they love. Together, New York, we're going to freeze the... Together, New York, we're going to make buses fast and... Together, New York, we're going to deliver universal... We will make our city one where every person who calls it home can live a dignified life.
All right. So, I mean, look, not great chants. First of all, just not, it doesn't have the rhythm. A good chant is all about rhythm, and he not doing great there. But this is the stuff that is like, look, everybody's attacking the guy for being a jihadist. Yeah, I think I mentioned this on the Daryl episode. I posted on Twitter the other day, and I was like, everybody's telling me this guy's like a Jew hater, jihad. Like, what's this based on? What are you talking about? And they have nothing. Everyone goes, he said globalize the intifada. And you're like, when did he say that? Can I see the clip of it? You go, well, okay, he didn't say that, but he was asked about it and he refused to denounce it. And, you know, whatever. It's all this other shit they're like trying to convince you of. But this is the shit that's resonating with people. And look, let's just start with this, right? One of the and this is why I do say it's almost like I say the implication is communism, is because none of them ever seem to give you a limiting principle. Like they always seem to just, it's like with the minimum wage debate. They always seem to go like, we need, you know, the minimum wage is currently $12. We need $15 an hour. And then, you know, like a few years later, all their spending bills have destroyed the currency. And then they go, you know, we need $25 an hour, right? Like that. So now it's like $25 an hour minimum wage. But no one ever gives you like, why not 30? Why am I not better than you if I say 30? And then someone could come along and say 35. Like, why not $100,000 in it? Like they never grant you the. So in other words, like if this model works, if we can say the buses are free, that works. Well, why stop there? Why go with rent freezes? Why not lower rent? Right? Like if you're already dictating that you can control the price of it, why stop there? Right? Like it seems like you present it as if it's an obvious good for the government to do more of this. But I'm just asking the question, reducto absurdum, right? Why not go further? Why not pay people every time they get on the bus? That's better than free. Why not give them $10? You get on the bus, here's $10. Is there a problem? Are we starting to see an issue? Because again, why can't I just stand next to Mamdani and go, freezing rent and free buses is kind of nice, but I say eliminating rent and making everything free. Boom. What's your counter to that, Mamdani? Why is that not better than your plan? I say that's my plan. I want to be mayor in New York City. Everything free. Everything. No more money. You have whatever you want. It's all free. Is this sound economic policy? Does it sound like that to you? Like before I even have to get into why that wouldn't work, don't you just as an adult go, yeah, okay, we can't do that. Like that doesn't, and then, okay, so as soon as you accept that, go, oh, okay, well then might there be some costs to doing a little bit of it? Why is it that if there's a cost at a certain point, where is the limiting principle? Where is this sweet spot? How do you know exactly what this is? And maybe all of it's just damaging to the economy because maybe you can't actually make things free. I mean, isn't that like the whole center of it, Rob? Is that the idea of saying look, you have this thing called the government, right? The government is a group of people who have a monopoly over the law. They can't just make things happen. Government doesn't produce anything. It can't give you anything. Like a guy who owns a factory and the factory makes widgets, he could give you a widget. But the guy at City Hall can't give you anything. All he can do is tax people. then who are the taxpayers? The New Yorkers, the same New Yorkers he's talking about. All they can do is take you, it's like if you have a swimming pool and I go, I could give you more water in the swimming pool, but I don't have any water. So what I can do is like, I could take some water out of the deep end and put it into the shallow end. You're like, yeah, but that's not like the same people who you're talking about riding the bus are paying taxes in New York City. All you can do is tax them for the bus ticket rather than charge it to them when they get on the bus. And by the way, you find out how nice it is. Like, I don't think actually, the MTA monthly cards aren't cheap, but like, it's actually not like the biggest expense for poor people. And what do you think is going to happen when all those buses are free? It's just going to mean you can't take them anymore because it's going to be homeless people all over them. But anyway, regardless of that, like, you get my point on this, Rob. It's like, you're sitting here, number one, it's like, why shouldn't we just make everything free then? And also, what the hell do you even think it means to make things free? What does it, like, this is just like, it's like you're promising alchemy. Any thoughts? Go ahead.
It's shocking to me how bad things have gotten in New York City that people are excited over a free bus ride. No one even likes the buses. People want the subways fixed. They just want government to govern and do all the things that they're supposed to do. And speaking to your point, it's just, this is how low people have stooped, that they're just, I've never seen a more pathetic, just clapping and yes, free, you're going to make it free. And that's going to be free. And this is going to be free. Listen, I don't currently live in New York City. I can't afford to live in New York City. And that's a problem. It would be better if New York City was not this just rich playground for people with a ton of money or the kids of people with a ton of money. I don't know what happened in New York City that it stinks, but it stinks now. But I don't have a right to live in New York City. You know what I mean? If I can't afford to live in New York City, I got to live somewhere else. And so there's something just crazy about some guy going, I promise you that you can live in this place if you've declared it home. Like, yeah. I don't know if there was a private neighborhood I wanted to live in and declare it home, but it happens to be the wealthiest zip codes in the world because the rich are living there. I'm probably not going to be able to live there. And so when you just make promises, oh, if New York City's your home, I'm going to make sure that your childcare is free, your transportation is free, and no one can raise the price on your rent. Hey, I think the best that can happen right now is this guy actually gets into office. He enacts all these policies. There is no bailout. He fails miserably. And people realize that when the government promises you free stuff, you don't want to take that offer. It's a deal from the devil.
All right, let's get back into the show. Yeah. Well, it's if you think about even the thing, which I did find kind of interesting with like the child care stuff, where you're like, well, so what are we really even talking about here? There was, I don't know if you saw this, Rob, but this was an unrelated national story about the government shutdown. But so I guess there was, what was it, the agriculture department, where they're talking about like the food stamp program, and they're, it was an attempt to put pressure on Democrats to vote for the Republican spending bill. But they were basically saying, I forget the exact numbers, but they need like $8 billion to meet like their requirement for food stamps for next month. They only have like a few $1 billion in the reserve account. They said, we're not using that billion. So unless there's a spending bill passed, like people aren't going to get their food stamps or something like that. And they're like, this is, and so of course, every, leftist on Twitter is like, they just threatened 40 million people with food insecurity. And of course it is, as me and you would both agree, it's like the ugly thing about the game of politics. Like, yeah, they use the people hostage to try, and you can spin this however you want to, because now they can say, oh, hey, Democrats, just vote for the Republican spending bill and all those people get their food stamps. So, hey, you're holding them hostage. And then they go, no, you're holding them hostage because we want this other spending bill with more additional spending. Your additional spending isn't as much as our additional spending. So they're playing this whole game. And the leftists are sharing it like, look how awful the Trump administration is. And it's like, does anybody just take a step back and go, hey, but like, at what point can we deal with the central problem here? Which is like, why are in America in 2025, why are 40 million people dependent on the government to eat to begin with? Is that the goal? Like, is that ever, like, nobody wants that. If you're raising kids, nobody wants at the end of that for your kid to be an adult who's now dependent on the government for food. That is not the goal. And if if we're in this a modern rich society, the fact that people are even dependent. So why is that? Like, what's destroying the economy? What is creating all of these problems? And so, like, so just my point being that, like, to say, okay, we'll keep them, like, even if you say, okay, fine, fund the food stamp program, keep all these 40 million people on food stamps, that's not really solving the heart of the problem now, is it? The heart of the problem is that they're in this position to begin with, and there never really seems to be any plan or even anyone even address, you know, that stuff. Like, you know, like, again, it's like the debate over health insurance, but nobody's even talking about how we're the most unhealthy country in the world. Like, okay, fine, but, like, isn't it, you know, like, if something like 70 something percent of all medical bills are due to preventable illnesses, then, like, why don't we get into prevention a little bit at some point? And so, again, this idea of, like, when you're talking about childcare, I mean, what are we talking about here? Like, there are public schools, and there are, I think, preschools, like public preschools, all over the place at this point. I think like almost every public school has a preschool, or every district has like a public preschool in New York City. So what are you talking about? You know, kids start preschool at 3. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the first 3 years of their life. We're talking about, oh, his big plan is that the government will raise your baby for you, not your kid, your baby. That, now, look, again, much like the food stamp thing, I'm not suggesting that, like, there isn't, like, a single working mom who's got 3 kids who has no other option than to put her kids in daycare right now. Like, her mom isn't around, her dad isn't around, the father took off, and she's got these 3 kids. Someone's got to watch these kids while she goes and works a job so she can, you know, take care of them. Okay, I understand that exists. But, like, at any point, are we going to talk about how, like, that's really not good? Like, that's not the type of society you want. Isn't one where, like, single mothers are, like, dumping their babies off to the government for the government to raise them so they can go out and hustle to barely, you know, get by. They also, I guess, need a rent freeze as well because they can't afford the rent, and they're living paycheck to paycheck, and the government is raising the babies. That is not a good system. Why are we here to begin with? Because, anyway, I guess my point is that once you start to go to the root of the problem a little bit and go, hey, can't we all kind of agree that it's preferable that babies, 6-month-olds, aren't getting dumped in government daycare? Like, it'd be preferable if they were raised by their mother or their father or their grandmother or their aunt or their uncle, or their, like it would be preferable for a single mom to not be completely alone, to have a bit of a support system that maybe the government is never going to quite simulate as good as a family could be. Maybe she needs a little bit more than a government check or her rent freezed or free childcare. I think what she needs is, like, actual support. Because if you start to ask that question, then you start to ask, hey, what undermines that? What contributes to that problem? And then you find, like, pretty obviously that it's like, oh yeah, the whole welfare state, the whole goddamn welfare state that moved in and became the competition of family and churches and community. Like, this is what welfare was before the welfare state. Before that, it was mutual aid and churches and communities. That's what took care of people when they were on hard times. And so you have these interventionist policies that undermine a healthy society, cause all of these problems, right? That you could look at that with food stamps, with the price of everything being driven up, with hyper regulation that slows down job opportunities, and you know what I'm saying? Like, all of these, like, policies that hurt the economy. Then you get people in a situation where they're dependent, and then you go, the only answer here is a socialist government program. Well, it's the same shit with all of these things. You have these economic policies that undermine prosperity and harmony and community. And then when all of that's undermined, you go, well, here's why the government's got to take over everything. And, you know, as bad as things are, they can always get a lot worse. And all of these prescriptions, just more government intervention into this shit, is going to make everything worse.
It's the, I mean, it's what you said at the beginning of the episode, but it's just what drives you so nuts about socialism. And it's what's been driving me nuts about Donald Trump's tariff policy. is that you've had previous market interventions of the way that the government has messed up the free markets, and then they come in with new solutions to fix it, which is always just going to make it messier. But people fall for the trick. I think if if there's just not enough of a, if you distorted the free markets enough that people don't feel like they have a fair chance or opportunity to go out and compete and live a better life, and there's a lot of socialism and just government money that's actually making people successful, then people look at it and they're just like, you know what? I want a piece of that pie. Why is it all going to the billionaires? If we're giving free money to them, then whoever the strong man is that's going to step in and say that they're going to do something that helps me, I'll vote for it.
No,
and
that's right.
And it just doesn't help. It's free money for or government loans for college just drives up the cost. It's free money for your healthcare is going to drive up the cost. When Kamala Harris was proposing free money for as collateral to go get a mortgage, what do you think that's going to do to the housing market? It's the devil's trick of free government money, is that it just increases the price on you, and now you're more indebted or more reliant on and not able to be self-sufficient.
You're completely right. And in fact, even like historically, this is kind of how it happened. But if you could picture, like if you put like try to whatever you have in your head of like the progressive era, like the original progressive era, in your mind of like how the United States government, like how the American history went in those days, right? But when you had like before the welfare state, you got like the central bank and the income tax and like essentially the billionaire like cronies, they got their welfare state first. And then they gave us the Great Depression. And then the New Deal, the response to that was almost like, okay, look, we'll give the farmers and the workers a little bit of welfare too. Like it was almost like, so, but instead of, right, like obviously if the government rigs the economy on behalf of the powerful and the big banks and the big corporations, and then this screws over the economy so much that you're like, hey, we should get some too. But it's like, no, the answer is cut their welfare, not also give us more welfare. But again, Rob, it's just such a simpler argument. Like if there's just a check in front of you, that's always more tempting than like, hey, let's get rid of this structure that causes this problem to begin with. But I do try to, I think with all of these things, when you think about economics, you really should think from like starting kind of from the ground up. This is why I like to use the desert island, economic models, because I think it just helps people think about like what we're even talking about here. I loved it was Bob Murphy who gave the example of like if you were teaching geometry. And for whatever, I don't remember much about geometry, but for whatever you guys remember, right? Remember a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and that's how you calculate the angles of a triangle. Okay, so like if you told a kid that, you explained it to him, like this is how, look, these are the total amount of angles that you could have in a triangle, and you can move a triangle around, but if this one gets bigger, then this one has to go, you know what I mean? Like, and so it's always going to be a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and that's the formula. And they went, okay, great. I'm going to go test this out on a bunch of triangles to see if your theory is right. You'd be like, you're missing the point. You don't have to test this out. You could just think this through. Just think this through. And then you're going to know that this applies to every single triangle that's ever existed. And you don't be like, no, I got to try this out on every triangle to make sure. Like, no. You can know just from thinking about it that it applies to every triangle. Okay. So in the same sense, you just think like you're on a desert island, right? And so you're on a desert island. Maybe there's like 15 of you. You get stranded on this desert island, and there's no hope of being saved right now. You have to create an economy on this island, and which you would right away. You could just imagine like different people being like, okay, I'm gonna build a spear and try to hunt for fish or go fishing or whatever. And someone else like, I'm gonna pick berries. Someone else is gonna build shelter. Someone else is gonna try to build a fire. We're all gonna kind of like build these things. And even if there was like you want to have some communal idea that people would voluntarily share these things, or perhaps people would produce what they produce and then trade them with others. Hey, I got some berries. I'll give you some if you give me some of your fish or whatever. Now, let's just say someone else came along and they were the government in this model. So then I come along, I'm there, everybody's doing their work. I just have guns. That's all I have. But I could point the guns at everybody and be like, hey, I'm the law here. No one else has a gun. So I got the power. That's really what makes the government, that they got all the guns. They got the cops, they got the military, they have the judges, they have the people who will make decisions and enforce them at gunpoint. The other group of people who do that are known as criminals. But so let's say, so I'm the government on this island, and everybody's producing, and I just go, I go, hey, while you guys are all working, I just came up with a rule. And the rule is that everybody gets fish for free. Like, have I added anything to this? Have I made our economic situation any better? Have I just said, that's it. It's free now. It's like, okay, but we still only have as much fish as we produce. We only have as much fish as that guy's able to catch. Like, you didn't add anything to the pile. You're just artificially saying this is going to be free now. This doesn't make anybody richer. In fact, you're not contributing anything to this problem. You're just pointing your gun and barking orders at other people. Nothing about this has actually produced anything. And in fact, what you need, whether you like this or not, to actually make people wealthier, what you need is to, like, be more productive, catch more fish, build a better shelter, pick more berries. You need more work. And so it's just like this whole mentality that what we need is from up top to legislate that everybody gets this is just, it's intellectually bankrupt. It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, any thoughts, Rob?
Checks out to me. Government doesn't produce this stuff. How can they promise you more of it? I think that it's reasonable and sound.
And there's also things like, I mean, it just gets it just becomes oh, sorry, just saw that Crowder tweeted that I'm coming on the
It's
show
almost
tomorrow.
amazing though,
So
the faith people have in the pitch for free shit. That not
Yeah,
one
yeah.
person's like, I don't think we have extra money. Are we paying for the healthcare? Where's the money coming from? Are we going to lose other services? What other services are you going to provide? It's amazing that there's no analytical thinking in people, that they just hear, oh, they're going to give me the thing. Great. Now I can have the thing. There's no question of, well, you guys have promised me free stuff before and it doesn't seem to be working out all that great. Where's the money coming from? We don't have any money.
Well, it's I mean, I think part of it is the way we're wired. You know, resources are scarce. We are lot, you know, everything is scarce essentially. We're all going to die. We're vulnerable creatures who are, you know, get sick and get hurt and die. And man, for most of human history, we were not nearly as comfortable as we are right now. And that was a real, like, if you could get your hands on some food, you got your hands on that food. And so the idea of anything being dangled, like resource being dangled in front of you, it's just like we instinctively want to collect those resources. And then on top of that, and this is part of the reason why I use the desert island example, is because you get to a point where we're in such an advanced, complicated economy that people just kind of go, well, I know these resources are out there, so let me get a little bit of them. Let someone get them to me. Well, you know, and you hear leftists say this all the time, right? Like, they'll say things. It's the most infuriating goddamn economically illiterate argument. But you will hear leftists say this quite a lot. Well, they'll be like, they say there's no money for any of this welfare, but I don't know. They had money for the wars. They had money to bail out the big banks. They had money. And by the way, that really speaks to your point, Rob, right? Your original point at the beginning, what a failure of the Republicans. Because, right, you see it right there. The left is telling you, how are you going to defend free market economics when you supported the goddamn bailouts and the wars? Give me a break about how the government can't spend some money. You spend trillions of dollars blowing up brown countries, right? And like, okay, so they have a point. They're calling out the hypocrisy of the right. But just think about how stupid that is. Like, the actual, look, like, it's a fair rejoinder to George W. Bush or Donald Trump or any Republican who supported all of them. But then, like, to people like me and you who are like, we just point out, you go like, no, dummy, we didn't have the money for that either. That's why we are where we are. That's why you have this unaffordability crisis. You know, like, think this through, man. You're going, oh, well, we already spent money on a whole bunch of shit that we didn't have money for. And now we're in such a terrible situation that we got, you know what I mean? Like, you're like, no, that's why. That's the whole point. We couldn't afford those things either. We spent a whole bunch of money that we didn't have. And now the country finds itself, you know, $37 or $38 trillion in debt with its currency totally devalued. It's like, right. No, the thing is, we didn't have money for any of it. Obviously. We're in tens of trillions of dollars of debt, and that's not even enough. So we got to print the money. Obviously, we couldn't afford it. We couldn't afford Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security or the war in Iraq or the war in Afghanistan or any of this shit or any of the stimuluses under Obama or Trump or none of it. We can't afford any of it. And so the lesson from that isn't, oh, we couldn't afford any of that, so let's buy a whole bunch more shit that we can't afford. I think this through, right? Like, think it through. If you were like you were like buried in credit card debt, and I don't know, your wife has been spending on the credit card bill like crazy, and then you come and you're like, hey, I want to put this huge purchase on the credit card bill. And then someone was like, oh, you can't afford that. And you would be like, oh, so the people like my wife are going to tell me we couldn't afford that? Well, where was that when she put all this money on that? It's like, oh, okay, yes, you're both implicated here. But the point stands that you can't afford that. And the fact that your wife put a bunch of shit on the credit card that she couldn't afford just means you can't afford that much more. That's not actually an argument for why you can spend a bunch of money now. That's a very strong argument for why even more so you can't do it now. Because like it or not, we spent all that money on that dumb shit. Anyway, I do think like you're right. And obviously, look, there's just been dominant, intellectual takedowns of socialism. I mean, I highly recommend Mises's book, Socialism, is phenomenal. And just really, there's so many problems with the real deal socialist models. And again, as I said before, which is implied. I'm sorry, if you guys never, and correct me if I'm wrong, somebody explain to me, tell me one time ever where Bernie Sanders or AOC or Zoran Mamdani or any of these guys ever offer their limiting principle, like where they ever go, we should raise the minimum wage to $25 an hour. Now, here's why we can't raise it to 35. Like tell me whenever one of them ever said, okay, well, here's why we can't just always do that. Because they make it sound like a given that it's always better to be giving this stuff away. So again, explain to me why we shouldn't just be full on communists then, why there should be no private property whatsoever and everything should be free or again, subsidized, forget free, pay you for the service. Because if you don't do that, then it's just like, well, obviously the implication here is that we should do this with everything. Why wouldn't we? And again, if you have real deal socialism, like straight up government ownership of the means of production, you have no market pricing system. Mises already demonstrated clearly how you can't really have a functioning economy without prices. Obviously, there's the incentive problems of why the hell would anybody want to work hard? Why would anybody want, like all the basic things that we all know, right? Like if you really believe in equality and everything, people should be paid the same or whatever. Not saying that Zoran is exactly saying this, but he does call himself a democratic socialist and then just says that means everyone should live with dignity or something like that. But like real deal socialism, if that's what you're talking about, well, why the hell would someone want to do? Why would someone want to take a risk? Why would someone want to do a dirty job? Why would people start their own businesses all the time. And the majority of people who start their own businesses fail. I think the majority of them fail in the first few years. Most businesses go out of business. So why the hell would anybody want to take a job where you could just fail unless there was a huge reward, a potential reward at the end of it? Why would anybody want, does anybody really want to be a garbage man more than they want to be a painter? Not exactly. I mean, it's like, for the most part, people just go, I don't know, I don't think I can make a living painting. And I know I could make a decent living being a garbage man, so I'll make that sacrifice for my wife and kids or whatever. So if you don't have this incentive structure, how is it? But anyway, my point is there's been these intellectual takedowns of socialism because it's really, really weak theory. It just, none of it makes sense. It's childish and silly. But as you said, Rob, when you hear these guys in their own words, say it, it does make you wonder, can't you just see the obvious hole in this right away? Just from a common sense angle, as someone's promising you this, especially with all of the promises that government has made, to our generation, you don't see that it's oh yeah, this just doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make any sense that that the answer to my problems is that a politician waves a wand where they all could have done it before, but this guy's just so cool that he decided to do it. And that makes my life better. Anyway.
It's also interesting, like on all of these things, it's amazing how you can just have a reasonable pitch. Hey, the reason why housing got so expensive in this city is zoning laws. And so we're going to change the zoning laws, and we're actually going to build a lot more housing, and there's going to be housing for you. Or, hey, transportation in this city has become a nightmare. And I actually think that our bus system is underutilized. And I actually have sat down with an engineer and figured out how we can revamp the bus lanes so that they're more efficient and that you want to take them. Or here's how I can fix the subway. Here's the problem with the subways. They overspent on this, and we need the union to finally come down on their wages so that we can get blank done. Or even on the child care. I mean, I don't know how you fix that one. I'd have to think about it. But I think child care, if anything, is a ploy to force women into the workplace because then they can tax their earnings.
Well, there's a lot to that, but that's definitely a part of the equation. I mean, no question. Look, there is no, and that's a topic for another episode, but there is no question that there is. Look, if you just happen to notice that, let's say and again, anybody who's like a little bit liberal here in this, or anyone who forget any of that. Like whether you think it's really, really great that women are in the workforce in the numbers that they are now versus back in the day when they weren't, like, okay, fine. But the point is that before the 70s, which was really the big like jump of women entering the workforce, before that, like in the 1960s and before that, the model essentially was that women were at home and men were in the workforce, and women were raising kids. And for, if you go back to like the 1920s, 1930s or stuff like that, like, look, there was a lot less technology and you were having a lot more babies. So it just was the way of the world. It was like there was a lot of real tough housework to do, and women were having like 6, 7 kids. So you were going to be, it wasn't like the way women have kids now, where like a chick who has like 1 kid, it was 9 months of your life you were pregnant, kind of a year if you really count the kind of recovery afterward, but it's like a year that you were pregnant. But if you had 7 kids, that was almost a decade of being pregnant, and like, anyway. But women were doing work. They were taking care of kids. They were taking care of the house. They were actually working really, really hard. I don't know if you've ever taken care of 7 kids before, but it's work. It's quite a bit harder than most jobs that any of us have these days. Almost anyone I know. I don't think there's anyone I know who works as hard as someone who just takes care of 7 kids. Like, I got 2. I got a gauge of what it would be to take care of 7. It's a lot. But that's not taxable labor. The government doesn't make money off of that. However, if the woman goes into work and then hires someone to watch the kids, now the government, in the old system, the government was taxing the man's income and nobody else's. In the new system, the government is taxing the man's labor, the woman's labor, and a third party's labor who's watching the kids. And so just saying, it was clearly in the government's incentive for the disintegration of the family unit, for all of this to become taxable labor. And for all the talk that the socialists and the communists have about exploiting labor, somehow the government doesn't get, what, they're not exploiting labor? I pay over 50% of what I make to the government. You add up all my taxes, my income taxes are insane. My property taxes, insane. State taxes, insane. The town taxes are crazy. Goddamn, that's not even starting to get into sales taxes or the taxes you pay on whatever, the tolls or anything like that, okay? But it is an enormous sum of money but then you're going to tell me about how the capitalists are exploiting me? What? That doesn't count as exploitation? You know what I get for that? What I get for all of the insane amount of money that I pay in taxes? I get wars that I find to be morally abhorrent. I get government policies that are reckless, a huge transfer of money from the working class and the middle class to the billionaire class. This is what I'm forced to subsidize. This is rigging the economy in favor of the powerful. And then I get a government who hates my fucking guts. A government whose their values are diametrically opposed to mine. They think that anti-war activists are a danger and that we ought to push transgenderism on your 4-year-old. That's what I get for the money I pay. But that's not exploitation? Like, what? Anyway, so, but the point being, right, just back to the thing, all of those guys, right? They all benefit from women being in the workforce and from the disintegration of the family unit. And also, all of the big government proponents have been totally for feminism for the last 40 years. That's quite a coincidence. It just happens to be that they're really on board with what their incentives are there. But again, that's like, look, and this is to the point I was making before, Rob. It's like if you gain so much goddamn weight that you can't fit out the front door of your house anymore. And then you're like, let's have a conversation about the size of that door. And you're like, wait, but on some level, shouldn't we really be having a conversation about what the hell happened here that you've gained this much weight that you can't fit out the door? Because like that is kind of the root cause of the problem. And in this, and you can't believe it. You can't believe that people look. I mean, there was this whole conversation, if you remember, Rob, during the Joe Biden years, as depressing as it is to remember, he was president once. There was that whole conversation around student debt forgiveness, and they'd be able to have that conversation without even thinking that maybe we should also talk about how the hell, like you'd sit here and you'd go, hey, I work at DoorDash. And I'm 200 grand in debt, I'm never going to be able to pay this off. And then the conversation would just stop. And this is how shallow and low IQ the conversation would be. It'd be like, that debt ought to be forgiven. And then we'd argue about whether or not the debt should be forgiven. And no one would just go like, can we scratch that stuff just a little bit? I go, wait a minute, it costs 200 grand to get a degree that culminates with you working at DoorDash? Hey, what the fuck? What the fuck is up with this entire goddamn system? And like, and so again, like I guess that's kind of right at the center of this Mamdani thing too. It's like he's talking about the unaffordability of New York City, but can someone ever show me anything that he's written or said where he has in a serious way grappled with or argued for what the cause of this unaffordability was to begin with? Because it seems that without even saying it, what the commies have is an implied, because you rich guys are so greedy, you know, and that's about it. Like I've never really heard any of the people who were advocating for forgiving student loan debt to really explain to me how the price of college got so damn expensive. Because I could tell you how. But like, if you want to know, why is it that in my mother's day, you could get a summer job and pay your college bills? In fact, that's what a lot of college kids did. They paid their own way. They didn't need their parents to help them. They didn't need to go into debt to do it. They worked as a cashier and paid for college. Same building, or maybe not the same building. They built a lot of new buildings. Same books, same knowledge, same process of learning shit. If you're learning, if you're studying the history of the American Revolution, maybe there's been some new books written on it, but it's like really the same goddamn mechanism now, isn't it, Rob, to go and learn about that stuff? So why the hell is the price 1,000 times more than it used to be? Like, that's a pretty big, you want to talk about this topic, that's a really big part of it. Why is that? When do they ever even deal with this? When do they ever even talk about why has New York City gotten so much worse? Why has the price of everything skyrocketed so much? Because by the way, your boy Jon Stewart seemed to kind of put his finger on it last week, didn't he, Rob? He kind of had, it was like inadvertent, and he stumbled upon this at the young age of 70. But he finally went, oh yeah, it was this government interventionist policies. Isn't that the thing, right, Rob? It's like you start with this rejection of laissez-faire free markets. They produce more wealth than the world has ever seen. But then little by little, you start convincing, everyone that we need a mixed economy. We need intervention. And then everybody basically just has bought into mixed economies at this point, including the former communist countries. They've obeyed the only ones who's hanging on. Cuba, maybe. China has embraced business. Russia has embraced business. They're not communist countries anymore. They're mixed economies, essentially. And, with varying degrees of authoritarianism. But so what happens is, right, so you have this mixed economy. And then what, again, like I said, back to the desert island thing, right? What can government do? Rob, this. All it can do, the funny thing, it can't make anything free, but it could make everything more expensive. if I'm just whatever the thing is, I'm the most simple business you could imagine. I'm selling apples. You know, I got a bunch of apple trees in my yard. I pick them and then I sell them to people. And that's just my thing. I'm running it out of a little shed and I'm just selling apples. And then what can the government do? The government comes along and says, this shed isn't up to code. We are instituting a new rule that everyone's got to have a really nice work environment. You got to have a much nicer shed. You got to have insulation for heating. You got to have electricity. You got to pay that guy more money than you're paying him right now. You got to make this up to code. All they can do is write more rules about what I have to do. And Rob, what does each one of those rules do to the price of that apple?
Makes them more expensive.
That's it, right? You go, oh, you have to put more money into this and more money into, well, then what do I have to do? I got to charge more money for each apple. Every single intervention just makes the prices go up and up and up. And then these fucking shallow commies come in and go, I know the answer. Make them all free. All the apples have to be free. Except why the hell would I even be selling them to begin with then? All right. Last word to you, Rob, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, I mean, it's incredible that that Cuomo took another stab at politics, and I guess there's something to be nice. It's something to be said for the fact that people are still so angry about COVID that Mamdani is the Zoran character is the more attractive figure.
Yeah,
I mean, because who the hell I wouldn't show up and vote for Cuomo. Doesn't matter who the hell's running against him. So it's nice that
there's no chance. Yeah,
it really is incredible to be stuck with these two choices, but. Luckily, I don't live in New York City, and hopefully we see these policies fail in such a spectacular way that when the next person comes around and tries to sell them, be like, what are you, like the Zoran guy? Just offering me free stuff?
Well, I would say hopefully the policies transparently fail with as little human suffering as possible for people to get the fucking picture that this stuff does not work.
You can have people standing around. I remember when there were buses in this town.
And it's just, I don't know. It's just, I guess the thing, like, and this will be my last thought. Sorry, I said last thought to you, but I'll take it. The last thought. But it's just that, you know, when I said the thing about your limiting principle, you would think that particularly after the 20th century experiments, there would be an onus on somebody calling themselves a socialist to demonstrate what that is, you know? I mean, like we had these experiments that were like, and, you know, guys, I'm not exactly an empiricist. I'm kind of an Austro, libertarian type. But like we did run these experiments. I mean, really, really hard to argue with experiments. Like literally the North and South Koreans are the same people. They are genetically indistinguishable from each other. They are the same people with the same culture and the same tradition. I mean, not at this point, but when they started the experiment. And like, I think North Koreans are like 3 inches shorter than South Koreans on average. Like we've run the experiment, like same culture, same race, same region, same everything. East and West Germany. Dude, the commies put up the wall because people were flooding out. It wasn't to stop people from coming in. It was to keep their own people from flooding out. But look at that. East Germany and West Germany. Again, same culture, same language, same history, same everything. They were one country before that, and they went back to being one country after that. And look at the stark difference, dude. And so if you're going to, after all of that time, after this experiment has failed so much, and you're just arguing toward going in that direction, isn't the onus kind of on you to at least at some point explain where you'd stop, why you think it is those were such disasters? Anyway, that's our episode for today. Catch you guys tomorrow, and then look for, yes, I'll be on Steven Crowder tomorrow. I saw he just tweeted that it's coming out, so I didn't spill the beans. The news is out, and some other cool ones coming up.
Only like 10 shows left for the year. Come hang out. Two more big runs, and then just 2 shows in December. So come out, everybody.
Very good. All right. Catch you guys tomorrow.